So, good afternoon. In the last class, today itself, we talked about the Vedic civilization, and we started with some introductory part that included discussions on the Aryas, their original home, the phases of the Vedic civilization, the sources for historical reconstruction, and also the process of Aryanization. Then we proceeded to talk about the Vedic economic life, and we discussed that how in the early Vedic age the pattern of subsistence was based on agro-pastoralism, but with time we have more emphasis on agriculture and emergence of rural settlements in the middle Gangetic basin and also in the Doab region. Rice cultivation, use of iron, something that is generally associated with the later Vedic age. Then we started with the social life, and there we discussed the Varna system in both the Rig Vedic age and in the later Vedic age. And then we also talked about the status of women, and I shared some notes there, and I hope you are comfortable with those notes. Now, if you remember, it was A, Varna system, B, status of women, C, something related to some other points, others. So, just change your paragraph and write few more lines. Just I want to introduce you with some terms. So, after changing paragraph you are writing, and what you are writing is part of others, something that we had written as part of our plan. Let some other details apart from the Varna system and the status of women. So, right here, in the Vedic literature, and here we are not dividing Rig Vedic or later Vedic. In the Vedic literature, we also find mention of many non-Aryan social groups, The most important of them are Dasas, Dasyus and Panis. Dasas, Dasyus and the Panis. The Aryas or the Aryans, the Aryas were generally hostile towards them. Approach was hostile. The Aryas were generally hostile towards them, and the maximum hostility has been expressed, towards the Dasyus. Maximum hostility has been expressed towards the Dasyus, and the war deity of the Aryas Indra has also been called, you must have heard of Dasyu Hanta. has also been called Dasyu Hanta, in bracket write slayer of the Dasyus. So who has been called Dasyu Hanta? Indra. So Indra enjoyed what we can say killing of the Dasyus, slayer of the Dasyus, Dasyu Hanta, and it seems that the Aryans were generally hostile towards the social classes we have mentioned, but particularly hostile towards the Dasyus. Who were these people? Exactly we don't know. But of course they were not of the same cultural identity. Then keep on writing in the same, resume your writing and write. A relatively less hostile attitude. A relatively less hostile attitude towards a relatively less hostile attitude towards the dasas, hostile but less hostile towards the dasas, has led to some suppositions or some conclusions that the dasas were descendants of some earlier branches. The dasas were descendants of some earlier branches of the Aryas, earlier branches of the Aryas. This contention is also supported by the use of the term dasa, or the occurrence of the term dasa in the names of some Rigvedic Aryan chiefs. Occurrence of the term dasa in the names of some Rigvedic Aryan chiefs such as Sudasa and Divodasa. Sudasa and Divodasa, Divodasa, Sudasa and Divodasa. The Panis have been mentioned as cattle, cattle, cattle lifters, lifters, mentioned as cattle lifters. So these three social classes particularly important for us. Panis as the cattle lifters, Dasyus towards whom the maximum hostility of the Aryans has been expressed, and dasas who at times are also supposed to be descendants of some earlier branches of the Aryas. Now with this we can say that the social aspect is over. Now we can talk about the political life. And here I think you should write as much as I am going to write on the board. I am going to write point wise. Let's suppose if we talk about the political life, yesterday we discussed that while talking about political life we take note of politics, polity and administration. Vedic literature is essentially religious literature. So political life, economic life reconstructed on the basis of indirect references. So we don't have what we can say a very coherent kind of picture about the political life of the Vedic people, but still some generalizations are made on the basis of indirect references, and I am going to talk about them. So when we talk about the political life, as we have to talk about that, we can talk about the Rig Vedic age, and then we can talk about the later Vedic age political life. Is it okay? Let me make it A. Political life, A, Rig Vedic, and then it is going to be the later Vedic. And as I told you, you should write as much as I am writing on the board. So there are certain things which are accepted, that when we talk about the Rig Vedic political life, we generally talk about Rig Vedic society as a stateless society. Now what does it mean? When we say that a society is stateless, it simply means that it is very primitive kind of society in which we do not have territorial identity, in which we do not have monarchies, bureaucracy, army, or anything and everything that can go with the state and the state structure. Is it okay? So the moment we say that Rig Vedic society was a stateless society, what is implied is that we are saying that it had no bureaucracy, no army, no taxation system, no judicial system, because these systems are generally associated with the machinery of a state. Is it okay? So we can make intelligent guesses related to the observations. So Rig Vedic society, a stateless society. Now the second point. Generally stateless societies are with tribal polities or tribal political systems. So you can simply write tribal polity. So Rig Vedic political life was characterized by tribal polity. This is the second point. Now there are some features related to the tribal polity. That is what? Third, you write prevalence of chiefdoms, not kingdoms. We have tribal chiefs, prevalence of chiefdoms. And then fourth point, that there are some features related to chiefdoms. There is a very important feature here, that is absence of territorial identity. Absence of territorial identity, as the tribal chiefs, CHIEFS, tribal chiefs, they have been termed as Rajans, ruled over their respective tribes and not over a distinct territory or definite territory. Is it okay? So if we have the tribal chiefs, they ruled over their people wherever they went. We know the lifestyle also, that the lifestyle was nomadic. So tribal groups kept on moving from one place to another, and tribal chiefs known as Rajans ruled over their territories and not over any definite territory and ruled over their tribes and not over any definite territory. This is one feature of what we can say the chiefdoms. Is it okay with everyone? Now the fifth one, relative absence, not absolute absence, relative absence of the hereditary tendencies. So we cannot completely rule out the hereditary tendencies, but relative absence of the hereditary tendencies with the system of election of the tribal chiefs, generally the most able-bodied members, system of election of the tribal chiefs and their removal in case of their failure to perform their duties. Is it okay? This is the fifth general feature of what we can say the Rig-Vedic political life. Then what else? The sixth one. Now, what kind of duties and responsibilities were associated with the Rajan? So today a state is primarily associated with what? Protection of life, protection of property. Of course, in the modern age we have welfare concept of the state or the concept of welfare state, so some other activities are also part of the same. But the primary function of a state is protection of the life and the protection of property. So now the Rajan was also responsible for the same. But one more thing that we need to keep in our mind, that what was the nature of authority of the Rajan? Generally in tribal societies, in stateless societies, what we find is that there is non-segregation of social units and political units, social institutions and political institutions, and also what we can say, the social authorities and political authorities. And the same is the case with political authorities and the religious authorities. It means the way today we have different authorities and their areas segregated, in the same manner we do not find in the case of primitive societies. So here we can say that first to write this is again a feature, non-segregation. This is again a feature of tribal society. Non-segregation, I hope the spelling is correct. If not correct, I would like to be corrected. Non-segregation of the social and political units and authorities. Non-segregation of the social and political units and authorities. That means social units were also the political units, social authorities were also the political authorities. Today we have demarcated father in the family is not a political authority, maybe a social authority today. But there was a time when father in the family was not only a social authority but also a political authority. It is something like this. Now we have some units and some authorities associated with them. So if we talk about the largest unit, you can add here, largest unit was Jana. Jana was a tribe basically, and Jana was headed by Rajan. This was the largest political unit, largest social unit. Now we have an intermediary unit that is called Vish. And Vish was, of course, a unit of the tribe, and Vish was headed by Vishpatis. This was an intermediary unit. And then we have the smallest social and political unit, that was Kula. Kula was basically a large joint and extended family headed by Kulpati or Kulapa. So this is how we find social units and political units. Particularly important are the largest units known as Jana, headed by Rajan, and the smallest unit known as Kula, that was a joint and extended family headed by Kulpati or Kula. Is it okay? This is also a feature of tribal political system, and this we notice also in case of the Rigvedic people. Is it okay with everyone? This was the sixth feature of this. And then seventh, and that is non-segregation or non-separation of secular, that is non-religious, secular and religious functions. It means Rajan had both. Is it okay? And if we talk about the secular functions, so that was associated with protection of life, protection of the life and property, through both offensive and defensive wars, that is tribal warfare we can say. So Rajan led his tribe into tribal warfare. And if we talk about the religious authority or duties of the Rajan, so that was about leadership in the prayers, tribal prayers, and minor offerings and oblations to the deities on behalf of the whole tribe. And since it was not a time when we have well developed bureaucracy, so Rajan was assisted by some individuals, not by institutions. So we can write in these matters Rajan was assisted, again check the spelling, assisted by Senanis. They were warlords basically, and Senanis and Purohit. So in the religious matter, Rajan was assisted by Purohit, and in secular matters, Rajan assisted by Senanis. We also have mention of Graminis, and these Graminis were basically heads of military bands known as Gramas. Is it okay? So here you can add, that is non-segregation, that we have some units called Gramas, and Gramas were bands of warriors. This is just additional, and headed by Graminis. So Rajan also received assistance from the tribal militia. We have no regular army, we have no regular bureaucracy, we have no regular taxation system. But of course Rajan, for fighting the tribal battles, relied upon the whole tribe, and this tribe offered the Rajan its youths, at times organized as bands of warriors known as Gramas, and they were part of the tribal militia. Militia is something that is voluntarily participating in any battle without any organizational setup. Is it okay? Then we have the next feature. Now if Rajan is performing all these duties, in what way we are going to compensate the Rajan? So we can simply say Rajan received greater share in war booty, that is loot and plunder. War booty, and also received, I think this spelling is correct, RECIEVED, please correct the spelling. Rajan received and loot and plunder, and also received gifts, GIFTS, in bracket write Bali, from other members, from other members. Can we say that Bali represented beginning of taxation system? So that is not generally accepted, because taxes by nature are regular and obligatory, and since Bali was neither regular nor obligatory, the appropriation or receiving Bali or gifts from the other members of the tribe not accepted as part of the taxation system. Is it okay? And that's why it was gift. And then we have the ninth feature, that is tribal assemblies. Tribal assemblies. We have mention of tribal assemblies like Sabha, Samiti, Bidat. We exactly don't know about their constitution and function, but it seems that Samiti had some role in the election of the Rajan, and Bidat was particularly important for participation of women. About Sabha we don't know much. Participation of women. And we have one more, Gana. Again its function is not clear, constitution and function is not clear. So these are the important points 1 to 9 related to the political life in the Rigvedic age. Is it okay? From 1 to 9, I hope there is no problem, and you have written all the points. I have deliberately written these points on the board because we have to make a comparative study while talking about the later Vedic age. But before we do that, let me repeat all the points. Please keep on focusing 1 to 9 as I discuss. That when we talk about the Rigvedic age, we have here a stateless society. In a stateless societies, we generally have tribal polities. So the same is the case with the Rigvedic age. In tribal polities, we have chiefdoms. These chiefs are the people who have been called Rajans, and they ruled over, tribal chiefs ruled, R-U-L-E-D. They ruled over their respective tribes and not over a distinct territory. And absence of territorial identity is something that is related to the tribal political system. And then the fifth one, that is relative absence of the hereditary tendencies with the system of election of the tribal chiefs and their removal in case of their failure to perform their duties. This is well understood. And then as part of the tribal polity or chiefdoms, we also find non-segregation of social and political units and non-segregation of social and political authorities. And there we have written some units such as Jana, Vish and Kula and Gramas. Jana that is the tribe, headed by Rajan, Vish, an intermediary unit headed by Vishpati. A smallest unit was Kula, that was basically a large joint and extended family headed by the eldest male member. I have mentioned this also in your class notes related to the status of women. And then non-segregation of secular and religious functions. And there, if we talk about the state or the Rajan performing secular duties or non-religious duties, they are associated with protection of life and property. And if we talk about the religious duties, Rajan provided leadership in the tribal prayers and also made offerings and oblations to the Vedic deities on behalf of the whole tribe. And of course he received assistance not from institutions but from some individuals, and such individuals have been termed as Senanis or Purohits plural, that is priests we can say. And then Rajan received greater share in war booty, that is loot and plunder, and also received gifts, that is Bali, from other members. Since Bali was neither regular nor obligatory, we cannot accept Bali as a tax, and so we cannot say that in the Vedic age we have, or in the Rig Vedic age we have the beginning of taxation system. And then in the Rig Vedic political system we also find some tribal assemblies whose exact constitution and functions not known to us, but their names are known, and they are Sabha, Samiti, Vidat and Gana. We have something specific to a Samiti, and it seems that it had some role to play in the election of the Rajan, and Vidata was particularly known for what we can say participation of women. About others we exactly and precisely don't know. Please show the whole board for a few minutes. So these are the details related to the political life, and as I was telling you that I have deliberately written these points on the board because we need to make some comparative studies. Is it okay? Now, non-segregation of social and political units and authorities. Venkat, do you think that PM of India is the head of Indian society or is representing social authority? No. He is head of maybe the government or the political system, a father in the family, and SHO in a police station. They both have some authorities, but the nature of authority is different. Is this clear to all of you? Social units also political units also social units. It is something like this. So a tribe was a social unit as well as a political unit. So now let us talk about the later Vedic age, that is political life, the later Vedic age. Political life. So now you can change this A into B. A was Rig Vedic, you have already written. Now we are going to talk about the B, and that is going to be the later Vedic. So what changes took place in the later Vedic? As I told you, I deliberately presented these things on the board so that we can make comparison. And what I will be doing, that I will be eradicating the old one and will be writing the new one. You will be writing the same in your notebook, but not without understanding on the board. So what about this stateless society in the later Vedic age? In the Rig Vedic age, society was stateless. In the later Vedic age, we just remove this term less. We have what? Transition, rather we can write here The point remains the same. Transition towards a state society. This is the first point related to transition towards a state societies. That is, a state formation is taking place. Is it okay? A state formation is taking place, and we find references to what? Janpadas. State societies, right in the same with the rise of Janpadas and Rashtras. Janpadas and the Rashtras. It has taken a little more space, but I hope you understand that the first feature in the later Vedic age is that we have transitioned towards a state societies. Rig Vedic had been a stateless. Janpada and Rashtras are mentioned, and these are accepted as a smaller territorial estates. Is it okay? Now what was the second? I have eradicated it on the board, but I still remember it. It was something like what? That we have tribal polity. So now instead of tribal polity, we are going to witness something that is called territorial polity. Territorial polity. Is it okay? Now when we have territorial polity, the third point we have written that we had chiefdoms in the Rig Vedic age. Now we have something that is called transition from CHIEF chiefdoms to kingdoms. Transition from chiefdoms to kingdoms. And here the fourth point was absence of territorial identity. So now here we can have emergence of territorial identities. Emergence of territorial identities. Emergence of territorial identities, which also led to the merger of some tribes, some old tribes. You must have heard of that Bharata and Puru. They came to form a new group known as Kuru, and their territory came to be known as Kurukshetra. So this is what we can say, emergence of territorial identities, which also led to the merger of some old tribes and rule over territories, and not only over the tribes. So now the kings ruled over a distinct territory. Whosoever would be living in those areas or in those territories claimed by the rulers, emerging rulers of the time, would be ruled by the same king. So I hope you understand that tribal jurisdiction was taking the form of territorial jurisdiction, and this was a very remarkable change. So this is what happened in relation to the first 4 points. I hope these things are clear to all of you. What we have written here as the fifth point, this is part of the Rig Vedic, that relative absence of the hereditary tendencies with the system of election of the tribal chiefs and their removal in case of their failure to perform their duties. Now we don't have this, and we have in its place appearance of hereditary tendencies and decreasing instances of instances, not completely missing, but decreasing instances of the elections. Decreasing instances of the election. Is it okay? What was the sixth point? Non-segregation of social and political units and authorities. Now here we can have sixth point as beginning of the segregation or separation. Beginning of the segregation or separation of social and political units and authorities. This is quite understandable. Then what we have written here at the seventh, non-segregation of secular and religious functions. Of course it continued. There is no doubt about it. All these functions are still there. But we have some addition, new addition, and that is what? Since we have the rise of Varnashram Dharma, so here we have what we can say, some addition, that is protection of the social order, the new social order that was emerging. Social order based on the Varnashrama Dharma. So Rajan is still responsible for protection of the life and property of his people. The segregation of secular and religious function is still not very demarcated. But of course now no longer associated only with his tribe but associated with the territory. And what we can say that Rajan is still supported by Senanis, is still supported by Purohit, but we have some other people also. And this time we can say that we have here Rajan no longer only supported by Senanis, but we can say here also emergence of bureaucracy. And we have 12 Ratnins mentioned in the later Vedic sources, and 12 Ratnins represented what we can say the officials of the state, and this we can see as beginning of the bureaucracy. So in the seventh aspect we have changes in form of inclusion of some new duties like the protection of the emerging social order based on the Varnashram Dharma, and now the Rajan being facilitated by some officials of the state called Ratnins. Rest of the functions are even today the same. Of course today we segregate political and religious functions, and the states are secular states, not religious states. But in ancient age, this kind of, even in medieval age, this kind of segregations not quite possible. So the Rajans also felt themselves, or the kings also felt themselves responsible for maintaining social order, and that was part of the preservation or protection of the dharma. So these are the changes which taking place. Now what happened here? Rajan is still relying upon war booty and all those things, but we have something new taking place here, and that is changing nature of the Bali. Changing nature of the Bali. Changing nature of the Bali. Bali had been a gift which became more regular and obligatory marking the beginning of taxation system. So army yet not appeared, but we can say in the later Vedic age we have beginning of the taxation system. Obligatory, marking the beginning of the taxation system. Why now taxation? Because taxes by nature are regular and obligatory, and Bali in the later Vedic age became obligatory and also regular. And here what happened to the tribal assemblies in the later Vedic age? Very simple. When we have Rajan or king becoming more and more powerful, we have decline of tribal assemblies. Decline of tribal assemblies. Though they are still mentioned, but we have less number of references, and one of Vidatha completely disappears from the later Vedic sources. So in the later Vedic sources, which one is not mentioned? So Vidatha is not mentioned. Others have been mentioned, but 12 Ratnins, R-A-T-N-I-N-S, Ratnins, and they are the state officials, we can say. Now what were the reasons behind the decline of tribal assemblies? So everything that is happening in the economic life, in the political life, in the social life, everything can be mentioned as part of the causes behind the decline. So if society is getting stratified, tribal assemblies are no longer going to be as representative as they had been in the earlier days. When we have the expansion of the resource base for the king, when we have more powerful kings, when we have hereditary tendencies, so when king emerged or kings emerged powerful, naturally there was decline of the tribal assemblies or the old tribal egalitarian institutions. Varna system, declining position of women, beginning of settled life, beginning of agriculture, appearance of bureaucracy, taxation system, hereditary tendencies, territorial politics, everything that we have understood today can be cited as reasons behind the decline of tribal assemblies. In fact, those tribal assemblies were more suited to the tribal ways of life and not suited to the settled way of life that came to develop in the later days. Is this position clear to all of you? And this is what we can also say, everything that we have written in the later Vedic age. Here in bracket you can simply write one word, that is primary estate formation. Everything that is written in explanations 1 to 9, it is part of what is called primary estate formation. So if the Rig Vedic age was the age of estatelessness, the later Vedic age was the age when we have the primary estate formation, that is estate formation for the first time. And with this process we have transition towards estate societies, we have territorial polity, we have transition from chiefdoms to kingdoms, emergence of territorial identities, appearance of hereditary tendencies, beginning of segregation of social and political units and authorities, expansion of the duties of the king, which now also came to include the protection of Varnashram Dharma, and now Rajan also being assisted by 12 Ratnins, and then changing nature of Bali acquiring the nature of a tax, and then declining tribal assemblies due to everything that is happening in different aspects of the life. Now please show the whole once. We have discussed the later Vedic age, and we have made a comparison between the Rig Vedic apolitical system and the later Vedic apolitical system. Is it okay with all of you? So with this the Vedic civilization is over for us, and now we have to talk about the post-Vedic age. But before we start the post-Vedic age, you should ask your doubts, your confusions rather quickly, so that we can proceed to cover the next phase. And while asking doubts, please confine yourself to the issues which are being discussed in the class. Rig Vedic political system, later Vedic political system, or we can say Rig Vedic political tendencies and later Vedic political tendencies are clear to you or not? Should I remove whatever we have written on the board? Because we need some space for making the plan for the next phase of the Indian history, that is called the post-Vedic age. Politically, economically, very significant, even culturally. You must be knowing about the rise of Buddhism, Jainism and other heterodox sects. Ganji Venkata don't draw this kind of conclusions. How can we say that modern political system is based on the later Vedic age? Can we say so? Modern political system is characterized by sovereignty of people, characterized by democracy, republicanism, simply because we have some instances of the election of tribal chiefs. We can't say so. Is it okay? So now let us talk about the post-Vedic age. And as we have been doing, we are now going to make a plan for us for the post-Vedic age, and we can proceed accordingly. We can have discussions, we can have dictations, and I have already shared some notes with you, possibly now visible to you. If not, then you can let me know some more notes particularly related to the post-Vedic age. Yes. When we say post-Vedic age, chronologically we generally talk about a period of Indian history from 600 BC to 300 BC. Is it okay? Notes will be updated soon. I would once again request and remind the concerned people to do something about the notes which are to be shared. Now this post-Vedic age is known differently in the historical literature. There are people who call it the age of urbanization, that is the age of second urbanization. First urbanization was in the Indus Basin in form of the Indus Valley civilization. The age of second urbanization. There are people who also call it age of iron, particularly those people who pay more attention to technological aspects. Then there are people who also call it age of reform, because we have heterodox sects. Then age of heterodox sects, all these names are, or simply age of Buddha. So we have different nomenclature for this period, which we have simply called post-Vedic age, and all these names are derived from some of the central tendencies associated with this age. Is it okay? Now when we think of this time, that is post-Vedic age, and if we try to find out important topics for us, the most important topic for us is going to be the second urbanization. That is the second urbanization. And we know the process of urbanization. That is basically a product of expansion of economic activities, emergence of non-agricultural activities, non-agricultural social classes and non-agricultural settlements. And this kind of development should take place only when we have a rich agricultural base. So in case of the first urbanization, that rich agricultural base was provided by the Neolithic settlements, Chalcolithic settlements, or the rural settlements of the Indus Valley civilization. And here, if you remember, we just talked about what? If we talk about the Vedic economy, in the Rig Vedic age, agro-pastoralism. In the later Vedic age, agriculture. With agriculture, we have surplus production. And with surplus production, we have expansion of economic activities. And that expansion of economic activities leading to what is called second urbanization. So there is a very logical connection. And this is what? The thread of ancient Indian economic development. Is it okay? That how in the later Vedic age, in the middle Gangetic basin, in the Doab region, we have emergence of rural settlements based on agriculture and domestication of animals, and these rural settlements capable of producing surplus, and the moment we have surplus, the logic of urbanization will repeat itself. You must have heard of this expression that history repeats itself. So history is repeating itself in terms of urbanization, and that's why this is called second urbanization. Basic and fundamental processes are almost the same, and they are associated with the diversification of economic activities and emergence of non-agricultural activities, social classes and settlements. Now here we can have some subtopics, and they can be like this, that is material elements, that what all we discovered in archaeological excavations which are associated with the second urbanization. Then we can also talk about factors. In general we understand, but some specific factors. And then not only factors, but we can also have some talk about implications. And when we talk about implications, we have ideological implications. We also have what we can say societal implications. Now the societal and ideological implications created conditions for the rise of heterodox sects like Buddhism and Jainism. But those sects we are not covering as part of our discussion on ancient and medieval, but you can locate those sects here only. That on the basis of the new economy created by the second urbanization and the implications associated with the second urbanization, both societal and ideological, we have the emergence of new sects. Is it okay? So let me mention those new sects here just for the sake of continuity, but with this understanding that we are not going to cover them here, they are being covered separately as part of Indian culture. But just to provide you a total picture, I am going to mention them here. Now when we talk about these societal implications and ideological implications, they are going to take later on form of heterodox sects. But before we talk about heterodox sects, we can have a comparative study of first and second urbanization. That way also they can give you some statements, they can ask you some questions. Is it okay? After this, the second important topic here can be the heterodox sects. We have many, and these heterodox sects represent or reflect nothing but ideological and societal implications of the second urbanization. We have many sects, but particularly important are Jainism and Buddhism. But as I told you, we are writing it just for the sake of writing. This topic we are not going to cover in the class as covered separately. So I am crossing it. But just to place these topics in the proper context, I am mentioning them. Is it okay? Then the third dimension here, I hope you remember the Rigvedic tribes known as Jana, then a smaller territorial estates in the later Vedic age known as Janpadas. We have just talked about them. Now this was time for Mahajanpadas, that is relatively big political formations, Mahajanpadas, and this topic is quite factual, and this is nothing but continuation of the same primary state formation. Simply we have more powerful kings, we have more extensive estates and more elaborate machinery associated with the state structure, but then our knowledge is very limited. We just have some references in some Buddhist and Jaina religious texts which are barely enough to provide us with knowledge of their existence. If we talk about their military system, political system or social system, our knowledge is very limited, despite the fact that now we not only have the Vedic literature but also the literature of the heterodox sects for the reconstruction of the history of this phase that is called a post-Vedic phase. Is it okay? And then we not only have Mahajanpadas, we have a new tendency, and that tendency is associated with what we call imperialism. Now we have 16 Mahajanpadas around this time, and out of those 16 Mahajanpadas, one, namely Magad, became an imperial power. That phenomenon is called rise of the Magad. So now how many topics we have for us? We have second urbanization, we have Mahajanpadas, we have the rise of Magad. And in second urbanization we have topics like material elements, we have factors, we have implications, and we can also have a comparison between the first urbanization and the second urbanization. We can bypass the heterodox sects and we can jump onto the Mahajanpadas. We can take note of some factual details related to them, and then we can talk about the rise of the Magad. Is it okay with everyone? Any doubt, any confusion related to this scheme? Now one more thing that we need to understand, when we talk about historical or cultural tendencies like urbanization, they are not or they can't be confined to a particular period, or what we can say in plain terms that they are long-term historical tendencies. Social developments, economic developments, political developments may take place overnight. We can change our polity overnight, but we can't change our economy, we can't change our society overnight. So in certain aspects of life, changes are more long-lasting, we can say, or changes are associated with long-term historical tendencies. So once we have the beginning of urbanization around 6th century BC, do you think that beyond 300 BC, the process came to an end? No. The second urbanization continued even beyond 300 BC. It continued for almost 1000 years till the age of the Guptas. We have what we can say the expansion of urban activities, expansion of economic activities. Of course, with highest watermark of this we can find in the early Christian centuries, that is 1st century AD, 2nd century AD, 3rd century AD, when we have the Kushana Empire, when we have the India's trade with the Roman Empire. So what we can do, that while talking about the material elements associated with the second urbanization or factors or implications, we are not going to confine ourselves only with the period mentioned on the board, that is 600 BC to 300 BC. We can move beyond the 300 BC also to take note of the developments associated with the second urbanization, which appears to be a long-term historical tendency. Is this position understood to all of you? So now have the notes been uploaded? Just let me know. The new class notes been uploaded or not? Okay, they will be uploaded soon. So meanwhile, let us proceed with this point, that is factors behind the second urbanization. Their notes are not required. They will be uploaded very soon. Let us start with the factors. So make a heading. I hope you understand this is whole scheme. And now make a heading, right? The factors behind the second urbanization. That instead of beginning with material elements, we are beginning with factors. Factors behind the second urbanization. In general, we understand, no? That urbanization is a product of economic expansion, and many times I have discussed this with you. But here we need to have some specific points, some specific facts. So now your heading is factors behind the second urbanization. So we have towns, we have cities, supported by literary references found in both Buddhist and Brahminical literature, also supported by archaeological findings. So what was the reason behind the rise of those towns and cities? Apart from what we can say the general. So right here the first point, new, first point here, new economy. New economy that was taking shape in the 6th century BC. So the first point is new economy characterized by new economy characterized by the following characteristics or the following features, characterized by the following tendencies or the following characteristics. So here we are going to have some sub points, and let me tell you that the way they are asking questions, this new economy itself can be a question for us, even in cultural section, or simply they can give you statements. So now we are going to take note of different features associated with the new economy. So write here first point, A you write, I am not writing it on the board, you write that extension of agriculture. Extension of agriculture. Now you continue, I will stop here. Extension of agriculture in relatively fertile plains of extension of agriculture in relatively fertile plains of the Doab and the Middle Gangetic Basin. The Doab and the Middle Gangetic Basin. Doab and the Middle Gangetic Basin. I hope this point is understood, that around 6th century BC we have expansion of agriculture in relatively fertile areas, and we know that fertility is associated with productivity. So we have greater production, so greater surplus. So again, logic of urbanization we all understand. Is it okay? So extension of agriculture. Now write the second point. Second point as part of the new economy. Right, cultivation of a new crop, in bracket write rice. We have seen in later Vedic age we have vrihi. So cultivation of a new crop, in bracket rice, in a more suitable climatic condition or conditions. More suitable climatic conditions. Do you think that climatic conditions are also associated with productivity? If that is the case, as we move eastward, you must be knowing, on the basis of your knowledge of Indian geography and Indian economy also, we have more suitable circumstances or climatic conditions for the cultivation of rice, in terms of the quality of soil, also in terms of increasing degrees of rainfall towards the east. We all understand this. So not only fertile plains, but more suitable cultural climate and more suitable crop in that climatic conditions. That will increase what we can say productivity. Why more suitable climatic conditions? Perhaps this is what Padma is trying to ask. So this is about Indian geography. I can't explain this in history, but as we move eastward, in the areas Bengal, Bihar, we have greater degrees of rainfall, and since rice cultivation requires plenty of water, so I hope understand. In terms of labor availability also, in those areas we have more favorable condition for the rice cultivation, and everywhere end result is the same. That is what? Greater productivity. Is this clear, Padma? Then write C. Right, a new technique of or increasing use of a new technique, increasing use of a new technique of rice cultivation based on transplantation, based on transplantation. In bracket you can write wet paddy cultivation. This is also called wet paddy cultivation. Now, I hope you are familiar with the techniques of rice cultivation. Now UPSC has included agriculture as part of your syllabus, so you can no longer ignore agriculture. So when we talk about rice cultivation, you must be knowing that plenty of water are required, deep plowing is also required, and seeds broadcast in a field, if left in the same field till maturity. We call this technique as broadcasting technique, or what we can say, if I rely upon the local terms, Chitua technique. It is said that in this technique productivity is not on the higher side, so people follow another technique in which the saplings are transferred to other fields, after some time. And it is said that in that technique, that is also called wet paddy cultivation or paddy transplantation, productivity is increased. And what else is required? We have new fertile areas under cultivation, new crop under more suitable climatic condition, and we have new technique that is based on paddy, wet paddy cultivation. Everywhere we are going to see increasing productivity, and all these are features of the new economy. That is one of the factors behind the second urbanization. And as I told you that this factor is so important that they can ask you separate question on the new economy that was taking shape around 6th century BC. They can ask you questions like this: consider the following statements, which a statement is correct or incorrect. Now write D. Again, one important factor of new economy. D, you write increasing use of iron. Increasing use of iron, that is a new metal, and that's why few people prefer to call it the age of iron. Increasing use of iron in agriculture. In agriculture, leading to its extensive and intensive development. Now iron was a hard metal, and deep ploughing is required for rice cultivation. Clearing forests also required a hard metal like iron. And when we have increasing areas of cultivation, we call it extensive development of agriculture. And when we have greater input on the same piece of land, we call it intensive development of agriculture. Since iron facilitated extension of agriculture or new areas under cultivation, or in bringing new areas under cultivation, iron is responsible for extensive, and since it facilitated the deep ploughing that was required for rice cultivation, it also facilitated the intensive development of agriculture. Finally, what is going to happen? Due to extensive and intensive development of agriculture, we have greater productivity. And the moment we have greater productivity, we have what? E, greater surplus production. That is element of new economy. Greater surplus of production. When we have greater surplus production, we have next here, that is greater diversification of economic activities. Greater, all these are points related to new economy. Greater diversification of economic activities. And we all understand in what way we have the diversification of economic activities. We have new craft activities, we have new kind of trading activities. Is it okay? So here E, F, G, again part of the new economy, that increasing craft specialization. Then E, F, G, H, expansion of the exchange network. Expansion of the exchange network. Then I, you must be knowing exchange requires medium of exchange. Is it okay? So what happened here? Monetization. Monetization of the economy. Monetization of the economy. that is increasing use of money. And there is no surprise that the oldest coins of the Indian subcontinent, which are known as the punch marked coins. Some of you may be knowing about these punch marked coins. The oldest of them are associated with the second urbanization, that is, they are dated back to around 6th century BC. Is it okay? So Indian coinage system appeared as part of the second urbanization. What was the position of the coinage system in the first urbanization, that is the Indus Valley civilization? We exactly don't know because we don't have sources for historical reconstruction. When all these things are happening, don't you think we can have non-economic, non-agricultural economic activities, non-agricultural social classes and non-agricultural settlements, and that is nothing but J, that is urbanization. So this is the logic of urbanization. This is what had happened in the Indus Basin when we have the first urbanization. But at that time, the new economy was associated with Neolithic and Chalcolithic settlements. And this time it is associated with the rural settlements of the Gangetic Basin, associated with the later Vedic age. And in the post-Vedic age, or by the time we reach the post-Vedic age, what we find is that a rich agricultural base has been prepared for urbanization. And this was the way we have growth of urban towns and cities. So if the question is how do you explain urbanization of the 6th century BC, you just have to write whatever we have written on the board. Is it okay? And this was the first factor behind the second urbanization, and that was the new economy. And as I told you, that new economy itself is a topic and all these are its a subtopic. Now I am going to eradicate the subtopics and we can continue with the main line. Is it okay? Now write the second. First was the new economy and its expansion. Now the second is written on the board. That is what? See, material developments can lead to ideological developments. But it can also be a case that ideological developments can provide moral or ideological justification for new kind of economic activities. So here we can also mention rise of the heterodox sects and more favorable ideological and moral climate for the new economic activities, and here we can also link the religious developments or ideological developments with the material developments of the time. At times questions are asked related to the material background of the heterodox sects like Buddhism and Jainism. Here I will just give you a few instances and you will be able to understand that. New ideological positions more conducive for the new economy. How? Can anyone suggest me? I will just give you a few examples. No need to write, just keep those examples in your mind, or if you so wish, you can write them on margins for your personal references. They are not part of the usual dictation. So, we all know about the system of sacrifices associated with Brahmanism, like Asamedh sacrifice, Rajsuya sacrifice. They are part of the religious life. And Vajpayee sacrifice. And we have in the later Vedic age, or in the religious life of the later Vedic age, grand public sacrifices. And in those grand public sacrifices, we have cattle slaughtering on a large scale. Now see, the Brahmanism that is a term used for the ritual based religion of the Vedic age. We have Brahmanism destroying the cattle wealth as part of its rituals and sacrifices. And if we talk about the new economy demanded preservation of cattle wealth, because now cattle power was also required in agriculture. So don't you think there was a mismatch between the religious position of Brahmanism and the new requirements of economy? So no wonder that in both Buddhism and Jainism, non-violence was accepted as a cardinal principle, and non-violence was not only a moral position at that time on the part of Buddhism, Jainism, but also an economic requirement, because economy of the time required what we can say preservation of the cattle wealth. This is how we have to link things. Then we have other examples also. If economic development is taking place, Vaishyas are going to have the maximum benefit, and it seems that their material condition came to be positively affected. And in the contemporary literature, Vaisyas have been also mentioned as donors. That reflects their prosperous position. But now their new economic status is not in harmony with their old social status. So they would be clamoring for, craving for more social respect and recognition. And naturally, Buddhism and Jainism provided them with the same, when these religions did not accept birth-based distinctions, but did acknowledge what we can say the karma-based distinctions. When society is getting polarized economically, we can have threat to property. So no wonder that both these religions were preaching non-stealing. And not only non-stealing, but also non-accumulation of the wealth. So the moral teachings or preachings of Buddhism and Jainism were also in harmony with the economic requirements of the time, and that's why we have this point here, and that is what? The rise of the heterodox sects and more favorable ideological and moral climate for the new economic activities. Since here we are not discussing the religion, we cannot go deeper into the analysis of the religious aspect. Someone is asking, explain Brahmanism. So Brahmanism is a term which is used for a religious tendency in the Vedic time that was based on performance of sacrifices, complex rituals, priestly domination, acknowledgement of varnashram dharma, karma, transmigration. So that is called Brahmanism. Is it okay? So even the new heterodox sects facilitated the process of economic progress by creating more favorable climate, and that facilitated what we can say the second urbanization. Now the third factor, estate formation. That is again associated with Mahajanpadad. Estate formation and the rise of ruling classes. Rise of ruling classes. Rise of ruling classes. In what way it can facilitate urbanization? So the moment we have estate formation and the rise of ruling classes, you must be knowing that ruling classes and estates have their own requirements. And most of the time political centers and administrative centers emerged also as urban centers. Court requirements of the court, requirements associated with weapons, court furniture and everything. I hope you understand this. So estate formation and rise of the ruling classes, creating market or markets for new goods and services, new goods and services. Add in the same point, you add, I will stop here, you keep on writing, कि generally political centers and administrative centers, generally political centers and administrative centers, also emerged as the urban centers, also emerged as the urban centers. So we have Mahajanpadas and their capitals like Shravasti, Rajgir, Champa, Kushinagar, all these, Shravasti, all these administrative centers and headquarters, political establishments, they were also urban centers, and it is for this reason we can say that the political developments of the time also facilitated the growth of urban centers and urbanization. Is it okay? Then write the fourth one. That is rise of Magad, but don't write rise of Magad, write here emergence of imperial tendencies. Emergence of imperial tendencies. Emergence of imperial tendencies. The moment we have imperial tendencies and 16 Mahajanpadas fighting for supremacy, their role in the economic affairs is going to be on higher side, because now a state needs resources, states need resources, and resources could have been mobilized only by promoting what we can say economic activities, or at least settled agriculture. So it is generally believed that the imperial tendencies of the time also facilitated urbanization. So these 4 points related to the factors behind the second urbanization are associated with this phase. Now we are going to take note of some factors which lie beyond this, because urbanization was a long-term process. So now write the fifth one here, the Mauryan Empire. Now how Mauryan Empire facilitated the economic activities, this we can understand while understanding the Mauryan economy on the basis of Arth Shastra later on, while talking about the Mauryan age. For the time being, just in bracket write explanation on the basis of the Arth Shastra. Later on we are going to talk about the Arth Shastra. Mauryan Empire. It means Mauryan Empire have played some role in creating conducive circumstances for economic development. Then write next point. Arrival of the, these are again separate topics for us. Arrival of the foreign ruling groups. Arrival of the foreign ruling groups such as Shakas, Kushanas. We have many, but write them. Shakas, Kushanas. In the post-Mauryan age. In the post-Mauryan age. In the post-Mauryan age. Now how this played a role? So right here, you continue writing in the sixth point that their arrival led to the establishment of trading contacts. Establishment of trading contacts with the new areas. Trading contacts with the new areas, such as trading contacts with the new areas such as Central Asia, the West Asia, Central Asia, the West Asia, and even the Mediterranean world. Mediterranean world. You must have heard of Mediterranean Sea. And even the Mediterranean world with its Roman Empire, creating a demand for Indian luxury goods, Continue writing in the same point, right? During this period, that is in the post-Mauryan age, that is during the early Christian centuries, continuing in the same point. During this period, that is during the early Christian centuries, we find the highest watermark, that is maximum development, we can say, highest watermark in the process of second urbanization. Highest watermark in the process of the second urbanization. Then we can have one more here, that is Indian trade with the Roman Empire. This itself can be a topic like the new economy, Indian trade with the Roman Empire. And after this we have declining tendencies or contraction of economic activities, we can say, and not the expansion. We have de-urbanization or ruralization and not the urbanization. So if they ask you what were the factors behind the second urbanization, so I think you can mention 1 to 7. New economy, which itself is a topic for us, whose sub points you have already written. Then the rise of heterodox sects and the favorable ideological and moral climate. Here, on the basis of your knowledge of Buddhism and Jainism, you can again keep on writing so many things. Then estate formation and the rise of ruling classes, creating market for new goods and services. And of course, here we have also mentioned political and administrative headquarters emerging as towns and cities. Now someone is asking me to explain this imperial tendency. So empire building is what? A cost intensive process, and when a particular estate would embark upon imperial expansion, that estate will also make efforts to expand its economic base, and that will lead to economic development, and any kind of economic development is likely to lead to what we can say the urbanization. Then Mauryan Empire and its role we have to understand particularly on the basis of the Arth Shastra later on. Then arrival of the foreign ruling groups, these Sakas, Kusanas, Indo-Greeks, they are our topics also separately, but here we have just mentioned them as part of the factors behind the second urbanization and how they played role. So they facilitated closer trading, commercial and cultural contact with the new areas, and those new areas also included the so-called Mediterranean world, and India developed a rich and flourishing trade with the Roman Empire during the time, and that also led to the expansion of economic activities. I think these kind of questions can also be asked in cultural section. Is it okay? So this much about the factors behind the second urbanization. This topic is over. That was B. Any doubt, any confusion? Now, notes have been shared with you, so you can refer to them. That I have mentioned material elements in the class notes. Can you find material elements in the class notes? I think this is the first topic in the notes which have been shared in the afternoon. Can you find material elements? Here when we say material elements associated with the second urbanization, we generally talk about those archaeological findings which are linked with the sites associated with the second urbanization. Just received. So can you tell me what kind of topics you find as part of the material elements? They are just factual details. Is it okay? Can you tell me what kind of factors are there? Can you repeat some of them? I am talking about the material elements associated with the second urbanization. What kind of elements do you find in the class notes? Can you tell me? Do you find NBPW, Northern Black Polished Ware? This is a pottery tradition like OCP and PGW, which preceded the NBPW. Generally with the second urbanization we have NBPW. Yes, you people have got this. And I have mentioned the details. These are just factual details. I think we should not waste classroom time on this kind of discussions. Is it okay? Then red pottery. What else? A rattan ware. That was a very rich kind of ware and imported from the Mediterranean world, particularly from the Roman Empire. And then iron tools and implements. Most importantly, punch marked coins. They are punch marked. It means they are not cast coins, made of silver, and they are the first coins of the Indian subcontinent. We just talked about monetization as part of second urbanization. I have mentioned the details. No, economically they are important, but politically they have not been very helpful for us in historical writing, because we don't find legends, that is anything written on them. So we cannot relate them. Then burnt bricks are there, ringed wells. So these are the points, certain facts related to the material elements. So I am going to erase this also. This topic is also over. We can talk about the implications. But before we talk about the implications, we have mentioned one more topic here. That is India's trade with the Roman Empire. The way they are asking questions nowadays, they can be a little specific in asking questions. So whatever notes have been shared with you, you can also find some notes with heading like Ancient Indian Trade with the Roman Empire. Can you find it? Ancient Indian Trade with the Roman Empire. Banquet seals are meant for marking proprietary rights. Coins are used as medium of exchange. So can you find details related to the India's trade with the Roman Empire? What kind of details are there? Can you specify something? I have included ancient Indian ports, commodities exchanged, balance of trade, this kind of issues, trade routes, participation, some literary references, some material findings. Can you find these things? They are details again, discussion is not required. So this topic is also over. India's ancient trade with the Roman Empire. That how we have expansion of India's exchange network. We have participation of both North Indian areas and South Indian areas, but particularly of the South Indian areas. North Indian areas relied upon trade routes, whereas South Indian areas mainly relied upon oceanic trade. Is it okay? And then if we talk about the commodities exchanged, then if we talk about Indian exports, we have Indian spices, sandalwood, particularly black paper that was also used as preservative, precious stones, ivory objects, and if we talk about the things imported, we have gold coins mainly because balance of trade was favorable to India. Then we have glass objects, wine, women, this kind of import. If we talk about ports, I have specified them. The most famous port was on the western coast, Bharukach or Bhadoch. On the eastern coast, we have Tamarlipti. If you go to the areas of the Cheras, there we find a port that is Muziris, and Muziris has also produced what we can say some evidence related to Roman settlements. In the Pandyan territory, we find a port namely Korkai. Korkai has been mentioned even by Megasthenes, and that was famous for pearl fishery. In the territories of the Cholas, we have a famous port known as Kaveri Patnam or Puhar or Pumpuhar. So this way, I have mentioned the details related to the routes, details related to the ports, details related to the commodities exchanged, and also some references. So that much is required, and I think you are comfortable with this class notes. Yes, flight of gold from the Roman Empire, Dibya, that has been lamented by Pliny, who is not very happy about this. So India's trade with the Roman Empire, this topic, I have mentioned some other details also. These are just of factual nature. We just have to place the India's trade with the Roman Empire in the overall context of expansion of India's exchange network and the urbanization. So any doubt, any confusion related to that? No. Now we can have a break for 5 minutes. Meanwhile, please go through the remaining parts of your class notes and just familiarize yourselves with the contents given to you. After the break, we are going to continue with this aspect, that is implications associated with the second urbanization. That is impact of the second urbanization on the society, impact of the second urbanization on the ideological positions of the time. Is it okay? So let us have a break for 5 minutes, and after that we are going to continue with the remaining topics. So today we had a little extended break with an ulterior motive to give you some time to have a look at the class notes shared with you. So I hope you have gone through the notes, and of course you are not supposed to remember them, but to familiarize yourself with the content, or at least with the nature of the content, so that we could make passing references to them in the overall scheme of these classes. Is it okay? So now let us talk about the implications. Is it okay? Implications of the first urbanization. And here we can mix both societal and ideological, they can't be separated. Ideological developments take place in society itself. So what do you think? When we have economic progress, when we have urbanization, when we have emergence of new kind of economic activities, new kind of social classes, what kind of impact these developments are likely to have on the basic structure of the Indian society? And now don't say that you don't know the basic structure of the Indian society. We have discussed a model in the class, if you remember, that egalitarian to social stratification, social differentiation and social stratification, initially on material basis, then on ideological basis, and then for rest parts of Indian history, we find nothing but modification of that basic structure under different impulses. So of course we have now second urbanization, and in the second urbanization, the old social structure is likely to have some changes, witness some changes, or at least some new tendencies can be noticed as part of the second urbanization. So can you suggest me something that when we talk about implications or impact of the second urbanization, what kind of impact or implications we can include? I am waiting for your responses, meanwhile enjoying my tea. Okay, you keep on suggesting me. We can't stop to wait for your responses. Here we have Arpit Dekate that attraction for foreign invaders and to control trade routes. Tushar Goyal, rise of Mahajanpadas. Yes, you both are on right lines. Anyone else? We have here Ayush Purohit, traders becoming more prominent. Yes, why not? Anyone else? Here we have Pratik Dongaris talking about competition. Then Abhishek Kumar Pandey talking about estate, society, material, best stratification in the society. Very good, Abhishek. Anyone else? So now you have some idea what kind of points we are going to talk about now. Here we have increasing new economic classes, rise of new classes like Shrenis, Mansi, open to foreign market, therefore exploitation of a small traders. And this is something more related to modern economy, Mansi. And then Rava Harshita, that is emerging merchant class as elite class. Pratik is asking, where do we find the mention of terms like Ratn Dvipa and Swarn Dvipa for Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia respectively? I have found it in one of the textbooks. I don't know the original source, but in the contemporary sources, is it okay? Brahminical and heterodox. So we have many literary sources associated with Buddhism, Jainism, like Tripitakas, Deep Bansa, Mahabansa, others also like Divyavadan, Ashokavadan, Brahminical sources like Sutra literature. Is it okay? We have this kind of terms. I have taken it from one of the textbooks, very popular textbook, written by, I think you must be knowing about Upinder Singh. But why to talk about, or why to be bothered about the original sources where the things are mentioned like this? Forget about these kind of things. This is not NET UGC examination in which sources are the focus. This is UPSC and this is general studies. You should simply know that in Indian sources we have things like Ratn Dvip and Swarn Dvip. Is it okay? And these are referring to some important areas with which Indians had a trade connection. This much understanding will serve the purpose. Is it okay? Otherwise, everywhere we have written so many things, 10 points related to urbanization. Now, if you ask me this question, where do you find the details? What you have to do with that? You find the details in the class, you have to trust your teacher, you have paid money for this. We try to remain authentic because we contact authentic sources. We rely upon reputed historians and their books and not upon market guides. They rely upon their sources. This is how the knowledge or the universe of knowledge has been created. That is based on what we can say mutual trust. So if I start asking Upinder Singh, where do you find Swarn Dvip and Ratn Dvip, otherwise I am not going to trust the book, then I hope you understand this whole process will become more complicated and will less about preparation for an exam and would be more about developing alternative systems of knowledge. And that is not our priority. Is it okay? Done. A bit rational, felt, sensed some dissenting voices just to substantiate the essay, sir. Okay, Pratik. But I hope the approach is still clear. We are not researchers. That always we should keep in our mind. So now let us talk about, see, when urbanization is taking place, a point that most of you have failed to notice, and that is very obvious, very general kind of point. Don't you think that for the first time in society we are going to have urban-rural divide? That is emergence of urban settlements, urban culture, urban social classes, and what we can perceive as rural-urban divide. Do you think that even today we have rural-urban divide? Is it okay? The same thing. So write the first point here as part of implications. Right? Emergence of urban centers, urban social classes, emergence of urban centers, emergence of urban centers, urban social classes, and appearance of rural urban divide, appearance of rural urban divide quite conspicuously or quite clearly, rural urban divide quite conspicuously, quite clearly, for the first time in the historical phase. Indus Valley was part of prehistory. In the historical phase. Is it okay? Now write the second point. Second point to write. Creation of a relatively liberal socio-cultural climate. Creation of a relatively liberal socio-cultural climate in the urban areas, which is supposed to have facilitated the rise and growth of new ideas, and institutions. Even today, in urban areas, we have more liberal cultural climate, whatever be the reason. So the same is expected also in the ancient time. And that's why Buddhism, Jainism were mostly urban religions. They were subscribed to mainly by the urban social classes. Then write the next point, third point perhaps. Right? Emergence of new social classes in the urban areas. And their increasing influence and their increasing influence. In the urban landscape. Their increasing influence in the urban landscape. In this context, we can mention traders, merchants, artisans, craftsmen, traders, merchants, artisans, craftsmen, bankers, that is lenders, money lenders. Don't write bankers, write money lenders, etc. Then write next point. In the urban areas, emergence of new kind of institutions or associations, such as the guilds of GUILDS, such as the guilds of traders, merchants and artisans, guilds of the traders, merchants and artisans, mentioned as Shrenis, in the contemporary sources, mentioned as Shrenis in the contemporary sources, Stop here to understand something. Shrenis or guilds, they have generally been part of ancient and medieval societies, not only in India but even outside India, in European society also. Now when we talk about guilds, the term used in Indian sources is Shrenis. They had emerged as economic associations for the protection of economic interests. But with time, they came to have some influence also on social life, political life, and they also contributed towards the process of social identity formation and the consolidation of caste identities in due course of the time. Guilds are so important as part of the Indian urban life that we can expect a separate question on them. And it is this in mind, I have shared some class notes with you on the guilds, that is Shrenis, that their heads were termed as Jeshtakas, Jetha, Jethakas. Jet is what? The one who is senior. Jeshtakas, Jethakas, Shrestins, Settis, and how we have with time their changing role. Can you find the class notes on the Shrenis? Here we are not going to include the details related to the Shrenis because here we are dealing with a larger topic that is associated with social implications. But some particular and specific details related to the Shrenis I have shared with you in form of class notes. Can you find that? If yes, just let me know. Can you find the details related to the Shrenis in India? How economically relevant in the very beginning, then how becoming socially and politically more and more relevant, and then when we have the economic decline, we have the guilds being transformed into caste groups, and they also created conditions for the proliferation of Indian caste. Is it okay? I have got some responses that yes, 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 yes. So the details of the guilds you take from there. Is it okay? Now here in this list, In this list, write the next point. Moving beyond Shrenis, write the next point. Right, in the urban areas, in the urban areas, in the urban areas, in the urban areas, appearance of new institutions and practices. In the urban areas, appearance of new institutions and practices, new institutions and practices such as prostitution. You must have heard of Nagar Badhu, this concept, and there was a very famous courtesan or prostitute in the city of Vaisali, converted to Buddhism by Buddha himself, Amrapali. So prostitution as an institution appeared as part of the second urbanization. So prostitution, gambling, and even eateries, that is hotels, that is eating out for the first time as part of urban areas. Eateries. Then write next point. Emergence of new hopes and aspirations. Emergence of new hopes and aspirations. Emergence of new hopes and aspirations. On the parts of new hopes and aspirations, on the parts of the newly emerged prosperous classes, particularly the Vaishyas, That these new hopes and aspirations, also developed on the part of rich farmers in the countryside, rich farmers or householders, in the countryside, that is in the rural areas, mentioned as Gahapatis. So who were Gahapatis? Rich farmers, householders, mentioned as Gahapatis, who have also been mentioned as donors, that is both Vaishyas and Gahapatis, who have also been mentioned as donors, in the contemporary sources, mentioned as donors in the contemporary sources. Is it okay? Then write next point. Emergence of new religions as alternative, emergence of new religions or sects, emergence of new religions and sects such as Buddhism, Jainism, as a part of reaction against the Brahminical orthodoxy, as a part of reaction against the Brahminical orthodoxy, providing alternative ideological positions and explanations, ideological positions and explanations. Ideological positions and explanations. So this way, and see, these topics are important also for cultural part, not only important from the point of view of history. In fact, in the very first class I told you that what you study as part of Indian culture and what you study as part of Indian history, medieval and ancient, they can't be separated. They are complementary and supplementary. The topics here may be important there in the cultural section, and topic there may be important here in the history section. So this much about the societal and ideological implications of the second urbanization. Even if questions are asked in mains, you can manage 100-150 words on these issues. Now, as part of the scheme that we made for this phase of the Indian history called post-Vedic phase, and as part of the topics associated with the second urbanization, I had included something related to a comparative study of both the first urbanization and the second urbanization. When we say the first urbanization, we talk about the Indus Valley civilization, and when we say the second urbanization, we talk about everything that happened around 6th century BC and continued for almost 1000 years. So based on whatever we have discussed as part of the Indus Valley civilization and based on whatever we have just discussed as part of the second urbanization, can you make some comparisons? Can you give me some points related to comparison between the second and the first urbanization? This is something, because you have the knowledge, you have to develop this art of making comparison. So can you make a comparison between the first urbanization and the second urbanization? Can you give me some points? Of course, I am going to make it for you, don't worry. But before that, I want some mental stretching on your part also, so that you could understand that the way they are asking questions in both PT and mains, merely possession of knowledge is not important. More important is the processing. So UPSC, of course, and Government of India are not interested in your knowledge. They have many sources for that purpose. They are interested in your processing capacity. Modern tools in the second urbanization. This is Kanishk Singh. Jaydev Pathak is saying iron use. Anyone else? Making a comparison between the first urbanization and the second urbanization. Here we have urban rural settlements, trade and commerce was similar. See, when we compare things, we include both similarities and dissimilarities. When only similarities are asked, then they are specified in the questions, such as like draw parallels or show similarities. When only dissimilarities are asked, then we have instructions like this, contrast. But when we have comparison, we have to take note of both similarities and dissimilarities. Clear rural-urban divide, territory-based approach in second urbanization, cultivation of new, emergence of classes, foreign trade, second urbanization, no guilds in the first urbanization. Praveen, are we in a position to say that categorically? Maybe, we don't know. Rich, fertile land or rivers, Varnas, Rahul Srivastav. Who else? Meenakshi Yadav first was very primitive, such as building of a small towns and a small scales of migration. Meenakshi, let me tell you that today we generally get inspiration from the Indus architectural traditions and not from the architectural traditions associated with the second urbanization. So we can't say that the towns and cities were not that much important. Tribal to estate migration, religions. See, yes, you people are coming up with relevant points. Now I am going to incorporate whatever you are saying. See, when we make comparisons, as I told you, that we take note of both similarities and dissimilarities. Is it okay? Now, for any kind of comparison, we need to find important and relevant bases or criteria for making comparisons. So, we have been discussing that in history, time is important, relative chronology is important, space is important, ecology is important, environment is important. So you should use these points, or you should use this awareness while making comparison. We can say that both first and second were processes, that is urbanization, based on what? Economic diversification in river basins. In the case of first, it was the Indus. In the case of second, Ganga. It means both derived their substance from the river basins. No? Then can't we say that Indus Valley civilization or the first urbanization was in the proto-historical phase, whereas the second is in the historical phase? The first mainly confined to the northwestern parts, but the second had more extensive territory, which continued for almost 1000 years. If we talk about sources, they are also important things. So the first is known mainly on the basis of archaeological sources, and the second is known on the basis of both literary and archaeological sources. So these general points we can utilize while making comparisons. No need to write, just I am trying to bring the things in your awareness. It is not that whatever I am saying you don't know. You know it, but you are not aware of it. The moment I would be telling, you would be reminding, yes, this is also the case. So, first in the proto-historical age, second in the historical age, first known mainly on the basis of archaeological sources, second on the basis of both archaeological and literary sources, both developed in river basins. What else? If we talk about the economic life, in the first it was mainly wheat-based civilization. In the second it was rice. Even if you ignore other dimensions, in the first and second, in both we have metallurgical developments, but in the second we have use of iron, something which is not reported from the first. And the highest achievement of the first urbanization was use of bronze. No, they could not use iron. If we talk about social life, then in both we have a stratification, in both we have differentiation. But in case of the first urbanization, ideological or philosophical aspects of that differentiation are not known to us. But in the second urbanization, we have not only social differentiation and stratification, but also the ideological foundation for the same, that is Varna system. And not only the appearance of the Varna system, but also its subsequent modifications. All these things can be easily included. Is it okay? If we talk about political life, in the first we are not very sure whether what kind of state structures were there, but in the second we have primary state formation. We also have secondary state formation, and even arrival of the foreign ruling groups representing what we can say the tertiary state formation. In terms of architectural developments, the achievements of the first appear to be more, what we can say, impressive than what we find in the second. It is something like this. So think of economic life, think of political life, think of social life, and think of what is important in all these areas, and start making comparison on that basis. You have the details. Here I think just general awareness is needed and not the detailed discussion. You have the details related to the first urbanization. You have the details related to the second urbanization. This is just a matter of approach and awareness. So with this we can say that the first urbanization is over. Now if we talk about the next topic, they are quite factual. Is it okay? We have a topic called Mahajanpadas. Maha is great, big. Janpad we have seen. So in the Rig Vedic age, if you remember, we have in the Rig Vedic age we have Janas. Janas were tribes. In the later Vedic age, we have Janpadas. These were smaller territorial states. This is what we have to understand. Smaller territorial states. That is primary state formation beginning. And in the post Vedic age, we have Mahajanpadas, that is larger territorial states. Is it okay? So Jana to Janpadas to Mahajanpadas. And this all developments are part of what we can say primary state formation. And this development is not going to stop here. Here we have rise of Magad. That is our next topic. Is it okay? And then we have the Mauryan Empire. And this Mauryan Empire, what we can say, represents the climax of ancient Indian political development. After that we have decline. Is it okay? So Jana to Janpadas to Mahajanpadas to the rise of Magad to the Mauryan Empire. Now here our sources are very limited. We just find some references in certain texts, and based on those references we conclude that around 6th century BC we find 16 Mahajanpadas. Out of these 16 Mahajanpadas, except one, that was Asaka or Asmaka, situated in the south on the bank of the river Godavari. Others were situated in the North India, and in the North India mainly in the Gangetic basin. The easternmost was Anga. The most important initially was Kashi, but later on the position of Kashi declined and it became a bone of contention between Magad and Koshal. Then we have Avanti emerging as the most serious rival of Magad because of the availability of iron. Then we have Gandhara, Cambodia, beyond what we consider Gangetic areas. So we just need to have some factual details related to them, related to their location, related to their political system, and also if any ruler is important for certain reasons. Here nothing is to be understood except one thing, that the rise of Mahajanpadas, part of this political development which is taking place in the ancient age, representing a stage in which we have 16 Mahajanpadas fighting among themselves for a supremacy. Not all of them fighting and ambitious enough, but some of them representing what we can say the imperial tendencies of the time. Now have a look at the class notes. Do you find anything on the Mahajanpadas? Do you find anything in your class notes on the Mahajanpadas? In terms of details related to their location, related to their nature, also related to some specific facts. These are just factual details. I think we should not waste our classroom time on this. But I need some confirmation from your side. Do you find details related to the Mahajanpadas in your class notes? Yes, 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 I have got many responses. Is it okay? Are you comfortable with those details? Okay. So Mahajanpadas, these are very factual things, and I think discussion is also not required, though we have discussed certain things here. Yes, Mahajanpadas, and some of them also represented what we can say the tribal polities. Now the last topic is here, related to the post-Vedic age, and that is the rise of Magad. And see, in history, when we talk about rise or decline, we take note of the role of circumstances and the role of individuals both. Earlier the emphasis was on role of individuals. Nowadays we pay more attention to the role of circumstances. So Magad was rising. Rise of Magad means that it was emerging as more successful contender in the imperial ventures of the time, and ultimately succeeded in establishing an empire that came to be known as the Magadhan Empire, and the same empire, when ruled by the Mauryan dynasty, became famous as the Mauryan Empire. Is it okay? So here what I am going to do is that I am going to draw a chart on the board. You also draw the same. Our topic is rise of Magad, and here we are mainly concerned about the factors that why Magad was more successful than others. Is it okay? This kind of questions are part of the logic of history, and generally they are asked. Like similar circumstances prevailed all over Europe, but the revolution took place in France, or the industrial revolution was part of European culture, but it has started in England. So likewise, we have 16 Mahajanpadas, but finally we have a rise of Magad. It means Magad had some relative advantages, and those relative advantages were not available to others. So the rise of Magad as an imperial power can be explained on the basis of what? Some relative advantages. Relative advantages on the part of the Magad, and when we talk about relative advantages, we include those advantages which are not available to others. Now where relative advantages in terms of what we can say the role of circumstances and also the role of individuals. Since it is about formation of an empire, role of individual means role of rulers and dynasties. Is it okay? A role of rulers and dynasties. You also keep on making this. Then when we talk about the role of circumstances, here we can talk about two important dimensions, that is the geographical location of Magad had some advantages for it, and then socio-cultural climate of Magad. Socio-cultural climate of Magad. When we talk about the geographical location, this had some economic advantages for the Magad, and also had some strategic advantages for the Magad. Economic advantages and strategic advantages for the Magad. And at times it becomes really difficult to segregate or separate both economic advantages and the strategic advantages. But even in this case, when we talk about economic advantages, we can talk about the benefits of the new economy. I hope you have not forgotten the topic new economy. So anything and everything that is associated with the new economy was in a more flourishing state in the Magad region. It means Magad had a very sound economic base for imperialism. So new economy and a sound economic base. Sound economic base. Without sound economic base, militarism, imperialism cannot be sustained. Then here we have what? Rivers, that is trade routes. We have availability of iron. Is it okay? We have availability of timber. These were some absolute advantages. And when we talk about strategic advantages, we can again mention here rivers, that rivers used not only for trade commerce but also for military movement. We can mention here also what we can say the iron weapons. We can also mention here timber, very important for what we can say, the fortification, and also mention the location of Magadhan capitals. Location of the capitals of Magad. Magad had three important capitals. You must be knowing Rajgrih, also called Rajgir or Girivraj. And in the contemporary sources, it has been called as a natural fortress for simple reason that it was surrounded by 5 hills. The second capital of Magad was Pataliputra, and it has been mentioned as water fortress, that is Jal Durga, as it was situated on the confluence of 4 rivers. And the third capital of Magad had been Vaishali, and Vaishali was also very strategically located. Is it okay? Vaishali was also very strategically located. If we talk about the socio-cultural climate, so in the Brahminical literature, Magad has been mentioned as an impure land. It means it was beyond the pale of or influence of Brahmanism to some extent. Not completely, but to some extent. Impure land. It means relatively liberal socio-cultural climate. Why liberal? Because Brahmanism of the time is supposed to be quite orthodox. A socio-cultural climate. And when this happens, we have what? Greater social mobility. So in this area, even Sudras could become kings. Greater social mobility. And when we have greater social mobility, when the rise of a particular social class is accepted, tolerated and cooperated with by other social classes, we call it social mobility. And then when we talk about the role of individuals and dynasties, here we have some dynasties of Magad like Haryaka dynasty or Haryanka dynasty, and here we have 3 important rulers. We have Bimbisar, we have Ajat Shatru, and we have Udayan or Udayin. Then we have Shishunaga dynasty. Here we have rulers like Shishunaga himself and his son and successor Kala Shoka. Then we have the most famous dynasty in the pre-Mauryan days, that is Nanda dynasty. And here the most important ruler was Mahapadmananda. We have some others also, but not very important. And the last one, Dhanananda, whose reign witnessed the... Dhanananda is a legendary figure in Indian history, you must be knowing. Then finally Dhanananda was overthrown by the founder of Mauryan dynasty. So we have the Mauryan Empire. And after Mauryas we have Shungas. And after Shungas we have the Kanva dynasty. I hope these are visible to you. Shungas and the Kanva dynasty. Is it okay? Yes, Kanva dynasty. Now these dynasties are placed like this, that first 3 dynasties are associated with the rise of Magad, which is presently our topic. Mauryan dynasty or Mauryas are associated with the climax of the Magad, which we are going to take as a separate topic. And these later dynasties are associated with the decline of the Magad. Now when we talk about rise and when we talk about role of individuals and dynasties, it means role of rulers, ambitious rulers like Bimbisar, Ajatsatru, Udayin, Sishunak, Kalasok, Mahapadmananda. Now they played very important role before the overthrowing of Dhanananda by Chandragupta Maurya in creating the basic imperial framework. Now, in what way their contribution can be acknowledged? Very simple. Any process of rise is about what? Wars, conquests, annexations, political alliances, diplomatic alliances, or diplomatic moves. What else? Matrimonial alliances. It is in these terms that we have to appreciate the role played by different rulers, Bimbisara, Ajasatru, Udayin, Sisunaga, Kalasoka, associated with the rise of Magad. Is it okay? Now please have a look at the class notes or remaining part of class notes associated with the rise of Magad. Rise of Magad, relative advantages, role of circumstances, I have just mentioned there but not discussed. Is it okay? That is discussed here on the board, that Magad had some relative advantages in terms of role of circumstances and role of individuals. They are like geographical location, social, cultural climate and all those kind of things. Is that clear? Just let me know, is that clear or not? And then role of individuals, I have specifically mentioned in terms of facts and details related to all these things about those rulers. Can you find the details related to them in your class notes? They are just factual details. That how Bimbisara was the pioneer of Magadhan imperialism, how Anga was the first victim of Magadhan imperialism, Bimbisara known as Seniya, Ajasatru known for his conflict with the Koshal Mahajanpad. Do you find those details in your class notes? This role of circumstances I have mentioned in the board on blue color, in blue color, and this much is required, not more than this. Now here we have the role of circumstances. Here we will find some details in your class notes. Tushar is asking, sir, do we need to learn holistically about the wars, rise and decline, etc.? Meaningful story about them, and just this much is sufficient. We have many more things to do in our lives and also in the field of preparation. So we should understand the basic process and we should know the basic details. The rest of the things again depends upon luck and so many other things. Move the camera downward, please. थोड़ा सा कैमरा दिखाइए इनको. I am making a space for this. See the whole scheme. And know as much as written in the NCERT books and as much as we are covering in the class. Now war details not available. Whatever available we have written. Kasi was given twice in dowry by Prasenjit to Bimbisar and Ajasatru both. Except this we know very little about this conflict. So what is important is to realize the limitations of our knowledge also. We just luckily find some names and some episodes associated with these dynasties based on some details in the Puranas, based on some details in the Buddhist sources. So again we cannot have a fair or what we can say a very elaborate kind of details related to this bar. So here you don't have to cut short things. History itself has cut short things because we don't know much about these people and their achievements. But in any case we are familiar that there is emergence of an empire and that empire is known as. Tushar Goyal is asking how to read from old NCERT. Just read and read. Expose yourself. Don't make notes because we have made notes in the classroom. And read NCERT only when you are not appearing this year. If you are appearing this year, simply rely upon the class notes. I'm not going to give you guarantee that you will have questions from these classes. This kind of guarantee system is no longer tenable. Let me be honest and fair with you. I can facilitate your understanding so that you could understand the facts and details properly, even if you read books. But the fact is that we don't have much time, and if you start reading NCERTs at this juncture of your preparation, if you have not read them, then that will be not a very healthy thing. But of course, if you have read them, please don't forget to revise. Then sir, whole NCERT or only specific topics will appear in 2022. Read the whole NCERT. Tushar, you have much time. So I'm not extending the class. Taruna, don't worry. The class is over. And the post-Mauryan age is also over. Read the class notes in the basic framework that we have discussed in these classes. In the next class, we are going to start with a new age, that is the Mauryan age of Indian history. Is it okay? So let us meet sometime in the future. I think we are not meeting tomorrow. So just 1 minute extra, and I think I can be forgiven for this sin. And of course I understand that at 4:30, when you have been attending classes whole day, even a minute extension can be quite costly. So let me relieve you as soon as possible. And we are meeting in the next class to talk about the remaining topics. In the next class, we would start with the Mauryan Empire.